I'm here to talk about John Fitch, and I think it goes without, can you hear me in the back for this? I think it goes without saying that he was a tremendous and very successful road racer. But I think probably most of you don't know what a unique individual he is. He's a really free-spirited guy, huge curiosity, creative, innovative, still has a ton of energy, and did this enormous breadth of things in the world. And I'd like to tell you about a few of them to try to paint a picture of what the guy's like. He was very early into World War II. Actually, an American in the first military engagements, flying a bomber out of Britain to the coast of France. Bomber pilots usually stay bomber pilots. They have very different personalities and skill sets than fighter pilots. But he made the switch. And that's kind of typical of a guy that can do so many things good. And when he did make that switch and was flying P-51s, the average life expectancy of an American British pilot was 5 missions. John lasted 2 years, almost made it to the end of the war. And during that time, he successfully strafed, that's obviously firing a plane on the ground, one of the very few German Messerschmitt jets. They were so fast that there was no way you could engage in combat with them in the air. You had to either shoot them down while they were landing or taking off. John got one taking off. I think they built less than 10. Later on, his flying career came to an end when he was strafing a German munitions train, shooting at the engine, one good locomotive, one good pass, a second good pass, and then he told me today, well, he was young and foolish and everybody was in a hurry to get the war over. He tried a third time and spent the last 2 months of the war in a prisoner of war camp as a result. A whole series of miraculous things happened, like the shell that took out his engine not exploding, that let him get through there alive and healthy. 7 years later, he was back in Germany driving for the Mercedes-Benz factory race team, the best team in the world without question. His teammates were Sterling Moss and Juan Fangio. And probably the high part of that part of his racing life was the 1955 Mille Miglia. I can't say it right. I don't know if you know what it is, but it's a 1,000-kilometer race on Italian public roads. I mean, roads that are like back roads in Maine, not interstates. As many as 600 cars they started one at a time. As many as 600 cars would start that, mostly race cars. That year, in 1955, there were something like 50 Ferraris. Moss and Fangio had real Mercedes race cars. John Fitch had a pretty much standard 300 SL. If you remember those cars, you'd think they're great street cars, but they were heavy. They weren't very good race cars. It was almost a joke. Neubauer, the manager of the Mercedes team, wondering, why are we doing this? John finished 5th overall. You can't do that. First in the touring class, and he beat the touring class record. They did this by time, by over an hour. And that was really, really impressive. And that was the high spot. A month later was the low spot. He was at Le Mans, waiting in the pits for a driver change when he would, that's not my phone, is it? When he would get in the car, and just before he got in, some of you might remember a terrible accident by a guy named Pierre Levay, who was trying to do the 24 hours all by himself. And I don't know what happened, but he had a horrible crash. The car came apart, went in the crowd, and 84 people died. Lots of women and children. I think the worst accident ever in racing. And that got John thinking about controlling out-of-control cars, if you will, particularly on the public highway. How can you protect the people in the car and the people when the car ends up in a bad place? 1968, he came out with the Fitch inertial barriers, those yellow barrels you see often protecting bridge abutments. V's in a row. They're all over the country. They're full of sand. They start with a low amount of sand in the first barrel, and it works up as you go back. He's had over 24 inventions since then. Last year, he published his second book, I think called Racing with Mercedes. And this year, he's 91, making his third pass at Bonneville. The previous two tries to set a land speed record in the 3-liter, that's a fairly small engine, touring category haven't worked. He's driving a 300 SL, of course. He has to get it in the mid-170s to kind of put that record away. And he told me today, racers are all the same. I was expecting him to say the other two tries didn't work, traction problems, aerodynamic problems. It was so hot. I mean, it was hot out there. So hot, the glare. And of course he said, the car has no horsepower. So, John Fitch.
To cover very distinguished and deserving people. I have a dozen copies of my book. That's my story. What I'd like to go a long time with, how many of you remember Phil Walters? Not very many. He might have been the best driver that ever lived. And I'm the person to say why. Because I raced with Phil Walters and against him for 15 years. And I saw everything that he did, and it was fabulous. Well, let me tell you a couple of cinchers. Enzo Ferrari offered him a test for his Formula One team in 1955. And Phil went to the factory in their private circuit, and it was raining. And Phil couldn't stay for a day or two or three. So Enzo sent out the word, he's hired. We don't need any tests from Phil Walters. We've been sending the best cars we can make to the States of Watkins Glen for years, and he beats us every time. So he's hired. However, Phil didn't do that because the race that Skip mentioned, a terrible event on 55 Le Mans, Phil saw women and children killed, and he just couldn't take it. He quit racing. On that moment, he stopped racing. And another cincher is, Mike Hawthorne was the world champion for Formula One driver. And the two of them, Phil Walters and Mike Hawthorne, shared a D-type Jaguar in which they won Sebring. And among our team and all the other insiders of the race, they were betting who had the fastest time. A few of them who knew him bet on Phil Walters. He had a faster time in the same car, on the same track as the world champion. Thank you.
The reason John wanted to talk about Phil, I believe, is that John was the presenter when Phil was inducted into your Hall of Fame some time ago, and he thought he left that part out.